Okay, so I'm afraid today I've got a bit of a cold. I'm going to record my prep and do a bit of a talk as we go, following the same pattern as Wednesday. I've created a folder inside the htdocs for the XAMPP Apache server under Web 2018, and we're making a SomethingWithDB. So just quickly review what we're doing. So the SomethingWithDB exercise is described briefly in the session 16 part 2. It's over here. So we're going to take data from a form, accept a username and password, redisplay it as a value on a form field. We're going to use the model view controller architecture with something view, something model, which is going to not only use session management for keeping the data, it's also going to use a database, a thing controller that deals with requests from the something view. If the session has been logged in, the something view uses the model to get previous values submitted, check the login status. The something controller asks the model to store the value that was submitted. When a username and password is submitted to the controller, the controller asks the model to check the username and password. The model does the following. If the name and password are accepted, the value is stored in the database. The value submitted, that is, under the username and password pair. The value is also stored in the session management system. The login status is stored in the session management system. So we've got a session management system keeping a value that was submitted, as well as it being stored with username and password pair. And we're also keeping track of whether we've logged in or not. That's the plan. So I've taken out the templates that were available from my previous work, and I've copied that across. I've unzipped it and copied it across into the web practice folder that I've got, and I've created a folder called SomethingWithDB, and I've also copied across the router as index.php, which is not available in the template area. And I'm going to do what I did last time and make this tidy and create, hopefully help make it work according to the pattern that we're using. So I'm going to have a model folder, and I'm going to have a view folder, and I'm going to have a controller folder. Computer seems to be going a bit slow. And of course the controller lives in the controller folder. The model lives in the model folder. Hopefully nothing silly's happened there. And the something view goes into the view. So when that's done its job, which seems to be very slow at the moment, maybe somebody's hacking me, I don't know. So I'm going to use brackets to open that folder, and then treats it as a project, which is rather nice and convenient. One thing I've forgotten is that in this case we also have a database connection. So I'm going to move that. For the moment, I'm wondering where I should put that. I think actually, since models use the database, for now I'm going to put the database connection in the same folder as the models, although it could be in a separate place. Okay, let's wait for that to do its bit. So that's better, so I can see that with brackets. So as previously, this is not going to go default to nav controller. I'm going to default that down to the something controller. go. So that's there. So the routing is now working. Just have a quick look at the controller, make sure I've got what I'm expecting. Okay, so from our last exercise, that's looking for the model. And I'm going to remember that we're using the required once approach to building up our MVC code. So that means that everything is actually from the root, from here, the top of the app, down. So going back to the something controller, this should actually go down into model and then across like that. Hopefully that's going to be fine. Check where else I need to change here. So the view should also be in the view. That's fine. So let's have a quick look at what the controller is doing here. So the controller is going to try and check we had a command. We have the same command we had previously, the send something. And if we've got something, it then asks the model to set the value of that request. So I've done a bit of a shortcut there, that's fine. If we've got login, so it's got two situations it's dealing with, sending and logging in. If we're doing a login, we need to check if we have a username and a password. A bit of a debug code sitting around here, so we'll see what that does. Then we're using the model to check the login, and so if the model checked login, there seems to be no code here, so that needs to be thought about. What's happening there, I'm not sure. Anyway, we'll check that later. So the next part, once it's come through, it goes straight onto the something view. So we've got some check. The controller always runs, and it accepts requests when it's constructed. So that's the same. Notice that this is now, it needs to be the new version of constructor. And it's not constructor, it's construct. Okay, so I'm going to leave that as it is right now. I'm sure there's some problems with that. So inside the controller, we're using a something model, and it's being asked to do a couple of things. It's checking the login, but we're not running any code with that at the moment, so that's interesting. And the other thing we're doing is we're telling the model to set a value. So let's look at the new model. So first of all, the model's requiring a database connection object or database helper. We've got set value. So in this case, the model's actually got the SQL in it, which is a bit mucky, but I'll leave it as it is. So getting out, if we've got a user, we're getting a username in the session, and then we're popping together some SQL that's based on username and password. So we've got a table called value, and it's using the actual username, and it's using an interesting version of SQL here that does an insert and on update. On the duplicate key update, sorry, when you have a duplicate key, it updates rather than inserts. That's chucking together the SQL. We make sure the connection's working. There's a something database, so we need to make that. And there's also a value table there, so we need to deal with that. It runs the query, and it also, so that query there should insert or update whatever the user's typed in. And also at the same time, it's storing the new value into something. So that's set value in the something model. And the new one here for getting values back, we've done the SQL in here too, which is sort of contrary to what I was suggesting we do, but that's okay. So if we've got a user, get the username and check if we've got a last record that's greater than, if the last lot that came in was greater than 0, then this query's actually worked because we're looking for a username. And in this case, it's not checking the password, it's just saying if we've got a username. So it looks like we can only submit we can only submit if we've got a username in the session. And then what is it doing? Well, it's getting out the value from the database through the dbnext command, because remember, when you run a query, the first place the cursor looks at is the first thing in the row. That just gets the first row, and then which is the next row at this stage. Then we get a value from the row, put it into result. So how do we have value there? It's because that value there is this value column here in the select statement, and we're also chucking the result back into session. Otherwise, if we don't have the user set, so if we don't have a SQL one, it's just chucking the value from something into the result. So that's interesting, that one. It's got, no matter what, whether we have a value from the database, we still get the result from the session. That's very interesting. So we're going to watch that. Something might be a bit dodgy about that. Now, forget at the moment, we're just forgetting whether we're logged in. Here's a logged in. So logged in, what does it do? It just checks the session to see if we've got what's it doing? It's got, if you've got logged in, then it returns true. That's all right. Now, the next thing we're doing is this is checking whether we have a username with that password. Check login. So first of all, we start off with, well, it didn't work. Connect to our database, something, and then we select from the database with that username and password, run the query, we connect. If it's greater than 0, then yep, we're good. And we bring back this and we make sure that the result ends up in logged in, which is cool. So if we're going through here, if that works, then result will end up setting logged in to true. And it also returns true or false depending on whether it can log in or not. That's kind of useful. Got some test code here, which I'm going to leave alone for the moment. So the other one is the view. So let's have a quick look at the view over here. So the view's going up to the going up to the model. And what else have we got here? Action is not just something controller, it's going to go directly across to the current location. And the current location is then going to tell it the controller is something. I think that's right. Got that right. So what's the form doing? That's its action. It's posting this time. We've got an input with something, and it's getting the value from the model, and it's got to send something. So if it's logged in, if it's logged in, it's going to show that. If it's not logged in, it goes and shows this. So if it's logged in, you can submit something, but if it's not logged in, it shows this part, and we need to change our action here. I might have that action wrong. There. Okay. So what I know is that if I run this now, it's probably got some problems with it. One of the major problems that we have is that we don't actually have a database. So how do I solve that? The database is called something, and what other things do I need? Well, the something model's looking at user, and it's got another thing called value. So I'm going to make two tables, one called user and one called value, inside a database called something. Right, so how do I do that? Well, a couple of ways to do that. I'm not going to do any foreign keys or anything like that. I think I'm going to use PHP myadmin to do this just as a quick fix. So I'm going to go to my, I'm going to go over here, run PHP myadmin on the local host, which is that one. And I need to make a new database, which I'm going to call something. I'm going to check I haven't got that already. I do. I'll just check that I've got the something database. I've got a user and a thing in this case, but and what have we got in user? Let's see. I've got a name and a password, so that's good. But it's called TVL user. And I've got a thing. The thing has got a description and a name. So let's have a little bit of a think about that. First of all, I don't have a table called TVL user. I've got a table called user. So to save myself some time, I'm going to rename that. Okay, now we've got name and password. Let's just check that. Let's go back to user. Name and password, that's good. And the other thing I have is a thing rather than a value. So let's just check that. That's the deal with value. Okay, so we're calling that thing. Double check that thing's got some relationship with the name. No, the thing doesn't have a name, it's got a description. So that's not very useful. Oh, okay, so I'm going to make a new table, just that's going to be called user. Hold on, that's going to be called value. Okay, so let's just make a new table. And we're going to call it value. It's probably not a good name for a table. Anyway, value, because why is it not a good name for a table? Well, value is quite often a keyword or a word of a part of a programming system. So be careful with words that are part of a programming system. Okay, so I've got two columns. What am I using on those two columns? What am I interested in here? Name and value, I think. I'm just going to do that. The name's going to be bar chart. I'll give it some length. I'm going to have value. Okay. There could be a problem as well because I've got a table called value and I've got a column called value. Let's see how that goes. Okay, now these are not going to have a primary key on them at the moment. I'm just going to, yeah, actually I'm going to make this the primary key because the name's going to be a primary key. Let's just get this in as primary. I think all I need to do is, I don't even know if I need to put that there. Let's do that. Okay, and that one stays as it is. So I'm just going to save that. Did I get some errors? Oh no, I didn't get some errors, so that's nice. So I'm not going to insert anything in there yet. I'm just going to leave that as it is. Okay. Why have I got the primary key on name? Well, it's an identifier. We're only storing one value per person per name. Okay, so I've got my value, name of the table. Should be value. Here it is. I've got my table user, which perhaps I should be calling user or TB. All of these perhaps should be called TBL. So at the moment I've got value there, so that's pretty much okay. Yep. And the other one is, so forget isn't actually deleting anything from the database, so that might be a bit of a problem. And this one's going to table user with username and password. Let's go have a little look at table user with username and password and see what I've got in it. Where are we? Here we go. Let's see that. Oh yes, we've got John. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and Jane with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Right, now do I risk this? Why not? Make sure my constructor's been updated. There we go. All right, so this is bound not to work first time. But I think we can leave the rest for class if there are problems with it. So this one's called SomethingDB, I think. Still check where I am. SomethingWithDB. It's not always case sensitive in Windows, but all right. So that's looking quite good. We've got our notices problem to solve. John 5. Okay, so we've got an error in here. It's a notice, which doesn't bother. So let's see what the error is. Undefined index something in something model on line 33. Okay, something model on line 33. Look at that. Something. That's interesting. So let's try to get a value. It's gone into the display, I would say, in the view, and it's trying to display that form here to get the value, but we haven't submitted anything yet, so that's a bit of a problem, isn't it? So how do we solve that? Well, what we have to do is check whether we have a something before we can do this this thing here, and if we don't, then we just return empty. So I'll just put that, I'll put a if statement in here. Like that. Oh, let's put a nice thank you editor for doing that. That one there. And now all these are in here. Make sure this has got the, yep, that one corresponds with that. That one corresponds with that, so that's cool. Double check that again. Yeah, okay. Save. So let's have a look. So I managed to log in, you see. That's looking better. Now, you notice, so if we go back to actually, yeah, it's worked, so that's nice. So I'm hoping that you'll have a look at that you'll have a look and you'll continue to debug the system, and I'll work our way around this for today. That's the plan. So I'm just going to go back and stop recording.